Jak 2 is a game that is without many modern conveniences, and something I haven't played for a very long time. Whenever going back to play the series, I went to my first ever PlayStation 2 game, Jak and Daxter Precursor Legacy. And while I always had fond memories of this game, going around with a hoverboard and shooting bad guys, I never replayed it until recently. Naughty Dog nowadays is a studio known best for bringing you the critically acclaimed Last of Us series. And I've actually discussed on this channel the Uncharted series and Last of Us 1, but to me, Naughty Dog was the company that made my first ever PS2 game, Jak and Daxter Precursor Legacy. However, they were already a very successful studio at this point, creating the first mascot for the PlayStation 1, Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot's origin is nothing short of a miracle. Make the game for a year, in secret, no guaranteed funding or publishing. They unveil Crash to Sony Japan and make the last minute adjustments to secure the sale. Then they get thrown front and center at Sony's booth, becoming their mascot. You have to remember, this came out exactly 2 years before Spyro. Sony was worried about their lack of mascot compared to its rivals. Who or what could they put next to their PlayStation logo, in what is now considered the tail end of the mascot era? Then, our favourite orange, two-legged Bandicoot walks through the door. It sold over 6 million units, being the best-selling game and at the top of the charts in the US. A localized version was released in Japan, and that also performed fantastic, being deemed a critical and commercial success. Eventually, with the 3 main titles, the sales numbers was well over 16 million copies sold. This wasn't enough, and Naughty Dog developed its own racing game to answer for Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing, which you all know as Crash Team Racing. As a kid, when we used to go shopping at the local supermarket, there was an area for parents to put their kids so they could enjoy a childless shop. I always looked forward to going to this because they had a PlayStation 1 set up with Crash Team Racing. And this was actually my first Naughty Dog game. As my family had an N64 and not a PlayStation 1, it's safe to say I have a nostalgic love for this game, and honestly, playing the remake still brings me joy. What we wouldn't realise is that this would be Naughty Dog's last game. Something I didn't know is that they didn't own the rights to Crash Bandicoot. The actual owner of the IP was called Universal Interactive, and the co-founder said the following: "Our relationship with Universal had gotten to a point where we couldn't continue to make Crash Bandicoot games," said Ruben. "Although we loved Crash Bandicoot and we loved working with Sony, it didn't make any financial sense. Universal owned the IP, and there was a hostility there that was just brutal." Later, Universal became known as Vivendi Games, and later they merged with Activision. Upon realizing that they simply wouldn't be able to work together, they started quietly working on the engine for Jak and Daxter, and they enjoyed a great relationship with Sony, and even got a hold of the first ever PlayStation 2 dev kit to enter the USA. After a 48-hour, all-expenses-paid trip to Japan, I don't know about you guys, but I find the behind the scenes of games and movies incredibly interesting. So I think it's time we go into something I thought of while playing the game, and what it's like to play a game nowadays without what I call modern conveniences.
Well, better you than me.
Something that will always interest me as someone who's been gaming for well over 24 years at this point. My first game being Ocarina of Time, I was 4 years old. And what interests me is the idea of being able to go back and still enjoy childhood games. Does nostalgia carry you through, or without any of those rose-tinted goggles, can you still play? People who are younger or didn't get into gaming until later in their life may ask the question, what is a modern convenience? Well, have you ever played a boss fight, got to phase 2 and died? Of course you have, we all have. In fact, I did it yesterday on my Persona 5 Royal stream. In a new game, you'll typically be taken straight back to that phase, and sometimes even have refreshed health and potions. This isn't always the case, but it happens often. Now, in an old game, sometimes you have to rewatch a cutscene, traverse through a couple minutes of linear platforming to get back to where you were before. One moment where I noticed this the most was during an escort mission, and let's pretend escort missions aren't the absolute worst. And what kept happening to me was and I realised this after, was that the NPC would die at the very end of the segment. And I literally mean, if I had survived another 30 seconds, I'd be done. And instead of a convenient autosave saving me half the journey, I find myself having the same conversation with the NPC back at the start of the mission. Frustrating is an understatement. One thing that will carry you through those moments is the satisfaction that you have beaten that pesky moment. A feeling I feel carries the Soul series. You will die, but when you thrive, you will be in a whole new state of euphoria. Maybe it's because I've been gaming my entire life that I can push past these moments. There was a moment on my stream where I was fighting Kara the Valkyrie in God of War 2018 for 6.5 hours. Was I underleveled? Yes. Was I on hard difficulty? Yes. But I spent my whole stream, and I do mean this, my whole stream, and a part of the next one in that fight, but I pushed through. And I would actually love to know how you guys treat games, and if, like me, you keep going, or do you quit and play something else? It's quite surprising going back and playing a game that doesn't regularly autosave, checkpoint, or even allow fast traveling. But depending on the game, that could be a good or a bad thing. This world was designed at its core to have no loading screens, and they employ lots of clever ways to make sure that happens. It's also not so big that you need it. We did just start to get autosaves with this game, but not to the extent that we see today. And the question to ask ourselves is, does this hinder or help the core gameplay experience? For me, it only really stood out on a couple levels. One being an escort mission, and let's face it, they're never good. And the other being a really tough shootout that could either be tuned down slightly or add a cheeky save point for your boy over here. I think whether or not a game needs these modern conveniences depends on how difficult the game is and how you want this to be experienced. This game lacks the ability to select a difficulty, and this is the only place you will really notice these lack of features. I'm the type of person that plays everything on hard because I like the struggle to eventually win formula. But that isn't for everyone. Whether you just want to experience the story and everything it has to offer in what is now called a story mode, or if you're the kind of person who wants to feel like you're fighting special forces every time you power up your console, that is not an option. And it's here you notice it so much, especially with games that involve shooting, because it feels like a roll of the dice whether or not you'll be shot to oblivion or escape unscathed. Sometimes I felt like I survived because I simply didn't get hit, which is a silly statement to say, but that randomness can have an effect on you.
Quite the money collectors, eh? Here's a gun upgrade. Now get out! I need my beauty now.
Trust me, brother. There aren't enough hours in the day.
The best thing a sequel can do, in my opinion, is build on the original. I'm not a fan of starting a new game and the first thing that happens is you're stripped of all abilities. I'm okay with losing health upgrades though, but that's just a given. In Precursor Legacy, the fighting was very basic. You had a punch, spin kick, jump spin kick, and a jump with slam. These ways of fighting are still perfectly viable. You couldn't win every section of this game, but if you want to get up in their face, you definitely can. I would love to have been in the room when Naughty Dog came up with the concept for this game. They were all sat in a room wondering, how do we follow this up with a very kid-like image between Crash Bandicoot and Precursor Legacy? Have we ever considered adding lots of guns? And that is exactly what they did. Through the story, you unlock a total of 4 guns, each with a different purpose. Now, they don't reinvent the wheels, so the red shotgun acts like a shotgun. It has a small cone radius, which is good when you have a group of enemies in front of you, and of course, a slower fire rate. The next one is a yellow semi-automatic rifle, which can be fired as fast as you can trigger it. It does a great amount of damage. This game takes a GoldenEye approach where so long as you're roughly aiming in the right area, they will auto-aim for you. At times it can be frustrating when a shot misses, however considering this makes it fit with the old third-person platformer, I am happy with the compromise. You can also combine this with a jump spin kick and turn it into the ultimate bullet tornado, which is honestly the biggest get out of jail card you will ever have in this game. Those 2 weapons will be the main ones you use. The others have more of a niche use. The blue machine gun, I never really mastered it, but it eats through ammo and it slowly builds up, much like a Gatling gun in terms of fire rate. I can never really nail the accuracy. It was great while shooting out of a vehicle when you have a much bigger target to hit, and it would stagger enemies, giving you some breathing space. But the main con is that it was completely single target, so if there were multiple enemies running at you, you're just spraying wildly, hoping that none of them reach you. Last off, you have a charged electric cannon thing. You have 4 shots, so be sparing when you use it, but it's practically a homing missile. While you may only aim roughly in the right direction, it should hit its target, and really you want to reserve this for the tanks and the big metal heads. One thing I learned is that you can't have a favourite weapon, because I did, and I was always scrambling for ammo for that gun. And if you couldn't tell, it was the yellow semi-automatic rifle. But the way you got ammo was either through ammo crates or killing soldiers. Generally speaking, you won't be lacking, you just need to do the opposite of what I did, and not pick a favourite. With the guns broken down, what are the enemies like? Well, they either miss you every time, or they're the world's best shot. And when I say this, there is no in between. Some of my attempts in areas with lots of soldiers either died right at the start, or at the very end, and there was really no in between, which made it either comedic, frustrating, or satisfying depending how you take it in your stride. Each class of enemy has a variety of versions of themselves. You have ranged, melee, flying, and tank. Generally speaking, the soldiers were more ranged and the creatures were more melee. Each has a slightly more optimal way to deal with them, giving you a variety of options to keep the game fresh. Lurkers are no longer the enemies. In fact, so much time has passed between the games that you even help save one. The new creature-like enemies in this game are known as metalheads. They have a great variety between them, from small to large, melee to range, and even their own tanky class. Unless you're getting into fights as you explore the city, you'll be facing the metalheads more, which is why we get even more variety. Generally, they are deadly accurate, or they're trying to zerg you StarCraft style. They also drop a collectible known as the Metalhead Skull, which is that shiny yellow object you pick up. I went out of my way to collect as many of these as possible, but in reality, you'll collect more than enough to upgrade the Dark Eco ability. Which brings me to my next point. The Dark Eco power-up. In the beginning of the story, we learn that Jack has essentially spent the last few years being tested on by the Baron, infusing him with Dark Eco, the very same that turned Daxter into our favourite furry creature. Except instead of being cute and full of humour, we have a badass warrior that wants to destroy everything around them, except your friends of course. Every enemy gives you a small amount of Dark Eco, along with some lying around. At the beginning, it takes a while to earn, but naturally as time goes on, you will face more and more enemies, making charging this special ability quicker and quicker. Something I learned is that it isn't worth being precious about this, so if you're looking to play this yourself, pop that ability every chance you get. It's super fun, and it's a nice callback to when Jack could only punch and kick. Now when you unleash that Dark Eco power, you lunge your enemies with the help of auto-targeting, making you extremely deadly. This power-up gets upgraded over time through the collection of Metalhead Skulls. Yet another nod to the previous game, a precursor is the one handing out the power-ups. It gives you a huge ground pound, which is perfect for clearing those hordes of enemies you begin to face at the second half of the game. As the story progresses, it gets harder simply by throwing more guys at you, making this ability even more viable. The only thing I miss about the previous game is that they've definitely taken some of the humour out of the fighting. When you died before, Daxter would go up and say something funny and all this kind of stuff, and they cut that out, which is a real shame because I used to find it absolutely hilarious. Now the tone of this game is much more serious, so I understand why they've cut it, but I wish we had that humour that the first game had.
Don't worry, I'll avenge you! Matt?
You are able to hone your skills in a practice range, which gives you all the ammo you need and a chance to use every gun available to you. And of course, setting a new record for yourself. With someone as self-competitive as I am, I relish the opportunity. But there are no rewards, so play it for as long as you're having fun with it. Overall, the fighting is kept fresh throughout the playthrough. Thanks to the slow introduction of weapons, new enemies, and once I finally stop having favourites, cycling through the best gun for the moment, which makes it that much more exciting. The only real issue I had with the combat is the inconsistency of enemies you face, but this feels like a problem that plagues many shooters. The majority of what you do in this game is fighting and then exploring, which brings us to our next part.
That looks like it hurt. Should I call for backup?
The key design philosophy behind this game was creating a true open world experience. At the time, they managed this already with Precursor Legacy, but they one-upped themselves here. Through clever game dev tricks, still employed to this day, Haven City serves as a hub world, and every time you end up going to a mission area, you'll reach a mechanical door This could be seen as fluff to keep you immersed in the experience, but in reality, it's a loading scene, which keeps you waiting just long enough to get the level loaded. A recent example is the crawl space in Fallen Order, or even Final Fantasy VII Remake, all to keep you engaged the entire time. Something you'll spend a lot of time doing is exploring around the hub world. There are vehicles everywhere, but the ones civilians are driving can be taken with absolutely zero repercussions, even if you steal a car in front of the guards, which adds to the theme of the story, only increasing my immersion. These soldiers do not care about the general public. The area was definitely designed with vehicles in mind. If you traversed on foot, it would take a long time. And not only that, you would never get in any trouble, so how is that fun? The vehicles are simple variations of hover bikes and hover cars. There is constantly traffic, and it is very easy to crash and burn. At least if you're a terrible driver, like me. You can change what level you hover on, which is either with every car, or on the ground with the civilians. If you hit a guard, be it the vehicle or on the floor, you will enter a wanted mode. But the reality is, if you keep driving or head into the start of a mission, it will end that phase, leaving you nothing to worry about. It isn't like GTA, where you gradually get more wanted, so to speak. The guards will only build up if you don't kill them quick enough. I would say I want this to be harder, but with how easy it is to accidentally trigger this phase, I'm glad it's not. The majority of your missions will take you to a smaller, more designed map outside of the hub world. It's not every time, but most of it, which I personally prefer. The hub area is split up into the slums, market, stadium, palace, harbour, and even a farm. There is no fast travelling, so you spend a lot of time Tokyo drifting, but at full speed, with hopefully less crashing, and nothing is too far away to even consider fast travelling. Something you'll always hear me complain about in games is the lack of colour, and this area certainly lives up to that reality. They wanted you to be depressed by this almost dystopian environment, especially when you're in the slums. I would love for a little more contrast, but it all works within the story, and the tone they're going for. Occasionally, you'll be reminded of the Precursors in its copper and green surroundings, letting you know it wasn't always bad here. Jak and Daxter Precursor Legacy was a collectathon much more reminiscent of Banjo-Kazooie and Super Mario 64. This game takes a different approach. They do remember the roots of the game, but if you come here expecting more of the first, you'll be very disappointed. This game arrived at a time where collectathons were dying out, and even the Mascot era was ending, with Ratchet & Clank being the last to hold the fort. I can't believe I'd gone this many years without realising that the Precursor orbs unlocked a secrets menu. When I look back, I should have realised, because games loved to put in a cheats menu. And who else wouldn't want to play Jak 2 with big head mode on, no goatee, and unlimited ammo? They even locked a level select behind this. And while I can appreciate that, I wish it was unlocked by finishing the game. As a whole though, these kinds of rewards for collecting loads of Precursor orbs is awesome. One last collectible, and it's really hard to class it as so, is when you defeat a metalhead. For the first time, they will drop a glowy skull. These are seen as the enemy of the Precursors, and you will offer these skulls as a means to unlock more moves for your Dark Eco Warrior. And the reason why I don't class these as collectibles is there is no total counter. The only time you will hand these in is to the Precursors, when you are essentially summoned by seeing the icon on your map. I went really out of my way to get as many of these as physically possible, but use me as a lesson and don't. To go back to traversing the map, one thing that makes this easy is the minimap. The icon will essentially point you to the nearest exit that will take you to where you need to go. You will not need to go on a map and set a marker, just simply follow the icon, it gets the job done. I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if I didn't talk about this one feature, but there is a freaking hoverboard. With Back to the Future and this game, my childhood self absolutely loved this. They even give you your own skate park, to try out all sorts of cool tricks and even trying to hit new score records. The only thing I wished for was there was more reason to use this in the hub world of Haven City. There are very few areas that didn't allow vehicles, and with the speed difference, it never made sense to use it as a replacement. But we did get at least one level designed with this in mind. If I had anything I'd like to add to the map, as a whole to make it more enjoyable, I would add points of interest and other things to do. You could quite easily take the hub world out of it and it wouldn't take away from the whole experience of the game, because you are simply heading from mission to mission. Which brings us to the story. You load up the game and you're welcomed by a familiar sight, which is the crew of Jack, Daxter, Kira, and Samos. They have activated a rift gate with what looks like a time machine. When a metalhead comes through with a swarm of nasty looking bugs, the crew is sucked in and everyone is thrown off in the rift in different directions. Jack and Daxter land in Haven City, and Jack is arrested by guards. Apparently they were expecting him. He is carted off with the words of Daxter, "Don't worry, Jack, I'll save you before you know it." Well, 2 years have passed, and we're given insights to what Jack has been up to, which is strapped to a bed and forced to be injected with dark eco. But after 2 years, Daxter is essentially present for him to break himself out, and you get a glimpse of one of the villains, the Baron, who is voiced by the one and only Clancy Brown. Now, while the tone of the story is serious, there are still moments of Daxter's wits and jokes coming through.
For many moons, she has waited for a juice pop, a jewel shop. Oh, I know! She's got a hairball, a hair lip, a hairy chest.
Close, but no.
He is definitely still the comedic relief. Something I loved, however, about Precursor Legacy was that you didn't need the story for him to chime up and make a crack at you. Something I really miss was being given grief or made to laugh when I died, and on the rare occasion I got a little bit tilted, I would have something to pick me up. Now you just die and head straight back to the next life. From what we can tell, Haven City is under siege by the creatures known as the Metalheads, and they aren't doing well. Baron Praxis is doing everything he can to make the city survive, including turning Jack into a messed up super soldier and becoming a tyrant in the process. Once you escape, you bump into an old man and a kid who is seemingly special, which leads to you being introduced to the Resistance. You will find that all missions loosely tie into the end goal, but act independently, so you will find yourself working for a variety of different characters, some grosser than others, with the end goal of taking down Baron Praxis. These missions vary from escort to go to a new area and hit the end objective. I don't want to go into the story too much, as it should be something for you guys to experience. But overall, I had a good time. The missions scale in difficulty, but I've always been a trial by fire and a tryhard, so I didn't have a huge issue, with the exception of one mission. If you have played this game yourself, let me know what you thought of the difficulty. It's not a long game by any means. I had this finished about 13 hours, this does not include all the collectibles, it's just simply beating every mission. I'm unsure whether some of the missions are side missions, I just did them all because I enjoyed them. And ironically, the missions for crew, which gives you all the cool weapons, were my least favourite, because they were all escort missions. But anyway, the game ends with everyone talking to Jack, saying how he's done with adventures, asking Samos that he would tell him if something else would happen in the future, and obviously they elude the subject, which is the hint, possibly. But that was many years ago, and we know that a Jack 3 has come out. And weirdly enough, one of the few Jack and Daxter games I haven't played.
Maybe we'll have a touching moment of silence in your honor.
I'd like to give him a touching moment.
Nowadays, Jack and Daxter fades into the past nostalgia for people, well, my age. And the last 2 releases in the franchise are both re-releases of the original 3, plus the spin-off Jack X, which I can honestly say very little about. Meaning the 2009 release on the PSP, Jack the Lost Frontier, is seen as the end of the franchise as we know it. The reality is, it seems like they ran out of ideas or wanted to keep moving towards the more mature Naughty Dog of today. A part of me would absolutely love to see an addition to Jack and Daxter. So many games want everything to look super realistic and have stories that could be the end of life as we know it. And to be fair, this game has that exact story. But I think there is space in the world for a Precursor Legacy, but with a new Naughty Dog twist. That could just be nostalgic me talking, because I grew up with collectathons. And occasionally to this day, we still get a reference such as Precursor Orbs in Uncharted. With the addition of the TV shows likely expanding further on the story, and a rumoured Last of Us 3, my dreams for a Naughty Dog of the past won't be happening anytime soon. And I did recently play through Last of Us 2 on my Twitch channel, but I'll be leaving that there. I like to joke about Skyrim being available in so many places you could probably play on your Amazon Kindle, but with The Last of Us getting yet another re-release of a re-release, it seems like the studio is getting a little tired. And with only a radical change in mindset will we see a Naughty Dog of the past. It's absolutely fantastic to be back though. Have a wonderful day everyone, and I'll see you all next time.
Curses, stupid, woo, crap. Forget all that. I'm gonna sum this up quickly because now you're cutting into my siesta time. Onan wants you to recover 3 artifacts from the Precursor Mountain Temple. Not 2, not 4, 3. Use the warp gate at the northwest side of the city and bring back the 3 items you find.